You ever been to a party where everyone's smiling, except you know the reason they're celebrating is the very thing that's breaking your heart? I stood there, champagne in my hand, surrounded by laughter, while the man I married clinked glasses over another woman's pregnancy. Everyone thought I was just the gracious wife. But what they didn't know was that inside my bag was a single envelope, the kind that could shatter a room in seconds. And before the day was over, they'd learn exactly why you should never underestimate a black woman who's been quietly keeping score. From the outside looking in, mine was the kind of marriage people whispered about with admiration. We had the well-kept home in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighbors who waved every morning, and a photo album full of vacations and anniversary dinners that could pass for greeting card ads. Thomas, my husband, had the polished charm of someone who knew how to win over a room. He'd rest his hand on my back when we walked into parties, pour me a glass of wine before anyone else's, and introduce me as my better half. People would smile and tell us we were relationship goals, like they had any idea what it actually took to hold two people together. The truth was, our marriage had cracks I could feel under my feet long before anyone else could see them. It started quietly, almost unnoticeably. His daily check-in calls became occasional. Then they became non-existent. He came home later and later, brushing it off with vague explanations about late meetings or urgent clients. He used to collapse onto the couch beside me, eager to tell me about his day. Now, he'd head straight for the shower, emerging in a change of clothes that smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't own. I didn't want to admit it, but I kept tally in my head. The nights he skipped dinner. The days he forgot to text me back. The weekends he suddenly needed alone time to clear his head. Then there was Grace. The first time her name came up, it was casual, too casual. Thomas mentioned she was helping with a big account at work. Something about her being a quick study and good under pressure. I remember the way he smiled when he said it. Not a big grin, just this small, private smirk. The kind of smile a man wears when he's thinking of something only he understands. I wanted to believe he was just impressed by a colleague. I wanted to trust that the man who once looked me in the eyes and promised forever still meant it. But that night, lying in bed next to him while he scrolled on his phone with the screen turned slightly away from me, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. The truth was, I had sacrificed more for this marriage than anyone would ever know. When Thomas hit a career slump 2 years in, I put my own dream of starting a consultancy on hold to help him rebuild his business. I worked long hours at my own job, then came home and managed our bills, cooked dinner, and hosted his clients with a smile. I endured subtle digs from his colleagues, the ones who asked where I really grew up or commented on how well-spoken I was, as if it were a surprise. I played the part of the unshakable wife because I thought we were a team. But love isn't supposed to make you feel like you're auditioning for the role of good enough. The first undeniable sign came at a dinner party thrown by one of Thomas's clients. Grace was there. She was younger, effortlessly polished, the kind of woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a boutique catalog. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm lightly when she spoke, and held his gaze just a beat too long. Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't move her hand. He didn't even glance my way to gauge my reaction, like my presence was irrelevant. It was then I saw it. A flicker of something between them. A familiarity. An intimacy. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind pulling apart every strange moment of the last few months. I thought about the woman I'd been when I married him. Hopeful, trusting, sure that love could survive anything. And then I thought about the woman I was now, cautious, observant, and unwilling to be blindsided again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just decided. If Thomas believed I'd sit quietly in the background while he played house with someone else, he was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. Once you've seen the signs, you can't unsee them. Every late meeting, every sudden change in routine, every half-second delay before he answered a question, it all went into the mental file I was building. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people who betray you expect you to react in the moment. They expect the screaming match, the suitcase on the lawn, the dramatic exit. What they don't expect is silence. And silence, I've found, is the most dangerous response of all. So, I didn't confront Thomas. Not yet. I slipped into a role I knew well, the quiet observer. The woman who smiles, nods, and says all the right things while collecting everything she needs to dismantle the lie from the inside out. It started small. I began keeping track of his mileage on the car, noting when the numbers didn't match the routes he claimed to take. I memoized the names that popped up on his phone, the times they appeared, and the tone in his voice when he answered. One night, while he was in the shower. His phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. The preview of the message was enough. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't forget the thing we talked about. The name on the screen? Grace. It was almost laughable, the way he tried to cover his tracks. He'd change clothes before coming home, leave receipts in his car like I'd never think to look there, and act overly affectionate in public, as if a few extra arm squeezes could erase the growing gulf between us. But the more I watched, the more I noticed something else. This wasn't just a casual fling. There were signs. Grace had started wearing loose tops, even when the weather was warm. She skipped wine at gatherings. Her hand often rested unconsciously on her stomach. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. At first, the thought nearly knocked the air out of me. The idea of him giving to someone else the one thing he always told me he wasn't ready for, a child, felt like a punch to the chest. We'd had countless talks about it, and every time, he'd said it wasn't the right time. That we needed to be more stable first. I'd believed him. But now I saw the truth. It had never been about timing. It had been about me. And that's when my quiet observation turned into something sharper: preparation. I started going through our financial statements, pulling old bank records, noting every miscellaneous expense that wasn't so miscellaneous when you trace the dates. There were charges from baby stores across town, payments to a small, private clinic, hotel stays that didn't match his travel schedule. I made copies of everything and stored them somewhere safe. Then I turned my attention to Grace. I didn't confront her either. Instead, I became friendly. Not enough to make her suspicious, just enough to make her feel comfortable. I'd compliment her clothes, ask about her work, drop little hints that I understood how stressful certain projects could be. She'd smile, maybe thinking I was naive, maybe just enjoying the attention. One afternoon, she let slip that she was planning a little celebration before the baby arrived. Just family and close friends, she said. She even invited me. Probably out of guilt, or maybe arrogance, thinking I'd play the part of the supportive wife who didn't know any better. That was the moment I knew exactly how this was going to end. But not yet. Timing is everything. And if Thomas thought he was the only one who could keep a secret, he was about to learn that a black woman who's been underestimated will bide her time until the perfect stage is set. And when that day came, he wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose the image, the life, and the reputation he worked so hard to protect. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and expensive, the kind that doesn't bend when you pick it up. My name and Thomas's were written in looping gold script, the kind of calligraphy you hire someone for. Inside was a pastel invitation with a photograph of tiny baby shoes tied together by a satin ribbon. You're invited to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Carter, it read, with the date, time, and location of the shower printed neatly below. Grace's name was there. So was Thomas's. Not in the same line, of course. She had listed him as a friend of the family hosting the event. But I didn't need his name in bold to know what this was. I stared at that invitation for a long moment, my heartbeat slow and deliberate. Most women in my position would have torn it in half, maybe thrown it in his face and demanded answers. But I didn't do that. No. I smiled. Because what they had just handed me was not just an invitation to a party. It was an invitation to my moment. In the days that followed, I began to build my plan. My quiet investigation had given me facts, dates, receipts, patterns of behavior, but this event would give me the stage. I wanted everyone there, Thomas's family, his business contacts, people who had always seen me as little more than an accessory to his career. And Grace's friends too, the ones who thought she'd won something. I RSVP'd yes. Over the next week, I let Thomas talk about his busy schedule and client dinners without so much as a raised eyebrow. I even asked about the party, pretending I wasn't sure if I could make it with my work deadlines. He assured me it was no big deal if I skipped it, which told me everything I needed to know about the part he expected me to play in his new life. But then something happened I didn't expect. A chance encounter at the grocery store. Grace wasn't alone. She was with another man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that made her light up in a way I had never seen around Thomas. He wasn't carrying himself like a friend. He had his hand low on her back, protective, intimate. And when she reached for a jar on the top shelf, he leaned in and kissed her temple like it was the most natural thing in the world. I ducked into the next aisle, my mind spinning. Could it be that Thomas wasn't the father after all? I knew I needed proof, and fast. That night, I went back through my records. The dates didn't quite match up. The first payments to the clinic and the boutique happened before Thomas and Grace's late nights had even started. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Thomas wasn't as important to her as he thought, which meant there was someone else. So I dug deeper, checked public records, looked through social media photos tagged by mutual friends. And there he was, the man from the grocery store. His name was Aaron Hughes, a contractor who'd worked on one of Thomas's recent projects. A man who, according to a few old posts, had been spending time with Grace long before Thomas's name ever came up. It hit me then. The baby might not even be Thomas's. And that changed everything. Because if Grace had been playing Thomas all along, then Thomas's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about humiliation. About him being used, and not even knowing it. The thought made me pause. For a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity doesn't rebuild a life. And I wasn't here to save Thomas from himself. I was here to make sure that when this all came crashing down, no one ever doubted who had the final move. And the baby shower? That was going to be the perfect place to play it. The morning of the baby shower, I woke up with the kind of calm you feel before a storm you've been waiting for. Everything I needed was already in place, the records, the photos, the timeline. I had rehearsed the moment in my head so many times that it felt less like a confrontation and more like a performance. And in a way, it was. I chose my outfit deliberately. A sleek navy dress that commanded attention without screaming for it, gold earrings that caught the light just enough to draw eyes when I moved my head. Every detail was chosen to say, I am in control. The venue was a rented hall at an upscale country club. Pastel balloons framed the entrance, and a table near the door overflowed with gifts wrapped in pink and silver. The air smelled faintly of roses and vanilla cake. Grace greeted guests at the entrance, glowing in a fitted dress that showed off her bump. She hugged me like I was a dear friend, the scent of her expensive perfume settling in the air between us. I'm so glad you could make it, she said. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, and meant every word, just not in the way she thought. Thomas was already there, playing host, pouring champagne into flutes for the guests. He looked surprised to see me but quickly masked it with a smile, that politician's grin he always wore when he was keeping up appearances. The guest list was impressive. His parents were there, sitting near the front. Grace's family, too, her mother beaming, her father shaking hands with everyone like he'd just been elected mayor. And in the back, leaning against a wall, was Aaron Hughes, the man from the grocery store. The man who might actually be the father of the child we were supposedly here to celebrate. I didn't approach him. Not yet. The party followed the usual rhythm, small talk, light music, polite laughter. Then came the gift opening. Grace sat in the center, unwrapping pastel tissue paper and holding up onyxes and baby blankets for the room to admire. Cameras flashed. People clapped. When she reached for my gift, a neatly wrapped box with a single white envelope taped to the top, I stood up. Before you open that, I said, my voice steady, I'd like to say a few words. The room quieted instantly. Thomas froze, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. Grace smiled nervously, probably assuming I was about to deliver some glowing compliment about her journey into motherhood. I've been thinking a lot about honesty lately, I began, scanning the room. About trust. About the importance of knowing the truth, especially when we're bringing a new life into the world. I walked toward Grace and handed her the envelope. Inside is something I think everyone here deserves to see. She glanced at Thomas, then slid a manicured finger under the flap. When she pulled out the document, her eyes darted across the page, then stopped. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face. It was a paternity report. Not for Thomas. Not even for Aaron. But for the man whose name she'd never expected me to know, a name that didn't belong to anyone in this room. Gasps broke out. Someone in the back murmured, "Oh my God." Grace's mother clutched her pearls. Thomas's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between Grace and me, trying to piece together how I knew. And then I said it, you see, we've all been told a version of this story. But the truth is, the man who fathered this child isn't who you think. And while Thomas here was planning a future around this baby, Grace was planning something else entirely. The room erupted, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, someone knocking over a glass. I turned to Thomas. "I'll have my lawyer send the divorce papers to your office. Everything you need to know is already documented." Then I turned and walked out. The noise followed me down the hall, shouts, questions, Grace's sobs, but I didn't look back. Because this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about choosing exactly where and how I would end the story they thought they were writing for me. When I left the country club that afternoon, the air outside felt different, sharper, cleaner. Maybe it was just the contrast between the tense, suffocating silence I'd left behind and the open quiet of the parking lot. Either way, I walked to my car without rushing. By the time I reached my driveway, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, all from Thomas. All ignored. The first message came from a mutual friend. "What the hell happened at the shower? People are saying you dropped some kind of bomb." Another, Grace ran out crying. Thomas looked like he'd been hit by a truck. And then one that made me pause. "Aaron left 5 minutes after you. Alone." I'd lit a match, but the fire was going to burn in directions none of them could control now. That night, I stayed at a hotel. I didn't want to be there when Thomas came home, didn't want to hear his voice trying to bargain or explain. But I imagined it all anyway. The raised voices, the scrambling excuses, Grace cornered by her parents, Aaron avoiding every eye in the room. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. Grace's family called Thomas. He didn't answer. They left voicemails demanding the truth, as if he could fix something that had never been his to claim in the first place. Thomas's parents called me, their voices brittle with shock, asking if I'd perhaps misunderstood. I told them I had the documents to prove it and that they could ask their son for the rest. By midweek, Thomas's business partner had heard the story, the whole story, and clients began quietly pulling contracts. The man who once sold himself as reliable, trustworthy, and discreet was now the subject of whispered conversations and pitying looks. Grace didn't fare much better. Her carefully curated image as a sweet, glowing mother-to-be was shredded. Friends who had posted pictures with her at the shower began deleting them. The supportive comments on her pregnancy updates went silent. And Aaron? He vanished. I heard from someone that he'd packed a bag and moved out of state within days. Whether that was to escape the scandal or the responsibilities that came with it, I didn't care. Thomas finally got me to pick up the phone on the 5th day. His voice was raw, the confident edge gone. "I just need to talk to you," he said. "You had months to talk," I replied. "You chose lies instead." He tried to tell me he hadn't known about Aaron, that Grace had been manipulating him the whole time. I let him talk. I didn't interrupt. Because in the end, it didn't matter whether he was the father or not. The betrayal wasn't about biology. It was about loyalty. And he'd thrown that away long before I walked into that shower. By the end of the call, he'd asked if there was any way we could work this out privately. That was when I told him the papers had already been filed. That my lawyer already had everything, the bank statements, the receipts, the proof of every lie. And then I said something I'd been holding on to since the moment I decided to stay quiet and play the long game. "You made a choice, Thomas. Now I'm making mine." There was silence on the line before he hung up. In the weeks that followed, the scandal became background noise. Other stories took over in our social circle, but the people who had been at that shower would never forget it. And neither would Thomas. I'd made sure of that. 6 months after the baby shower, the only reminder of that day was the framed photo in my lawyer's office, a shot someone had taken of me walking out of the venue, head high, sunlight on my face. My lawyer said she kept it there as a reminder that winning wasn't always about shouting the loudest. Sometimes it was about patience, precision, and knowing when to strike. The divorce was final in just under 4 months. My settlement was exactly what I prepared for. Every asset, every percentage, every piece of the life I'd helped build accounted for. I'd walked into that marriage with love and walked out with my dignity and my future intact. Thomas didn't recover so easily. His business took hit after hit as the gossip traveled further than either of us expected. Clients he'd courted for years stopped returning his calls. His social calendar, once booked weeks in advance, went silent. I heard through a mutual friend that he'd moved into a smaller apartment on the edge of town, that his once pristine suits now hung loose on him. Grace's life unraveled too. Without Thomas to bankroll her lifestyle, she moved back in with her parents. The child, whose real father never came back, was being raised in a home filled with quiet tension and whispered arguments. I'd heard she avoided certain stores in town now, unable to face the stares and sidelong glances. But this wasn't about their suffering. It never was. It was about mine, and what I chose to do with the freedom I'd carved out for myself. The first thing I did after the divorce was finalize the business plan I'd put on hold for nearly a decade. My consultancy launched quietly, without fanfare, but word spread fast in the circles that mattered. Within 2 months, I had more work than I could handle alone. By month 4, I had an assistant. By month 6, I had a waiting list. I moved into a townhouse downtown, modern, filled with light, with a balcony that overlooked the park. It was mine entirely, bought with my own earnings and the settlement I'd fought for. The first night I slept there, I left the balcony doors open, letting the night air in. It felt like breathing without realizing you'd been holding your breath for years. Socially, I stopped forcing myself into rooms where I was only tolerated. I built a new circle, people who didn't measure my worth by the man standing next to me. People who valued my mind, my humor, my drive. One evening, at a charity gala I'd been invited to as a guest speaker, I spotted Thomas across the room. He was alone, scanning the crowd like a man looking for a safe place to land. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded. I nodded back. And then I turned away. There was no satisfaction in seeing him diminished. The real satisfaction was knowing that I didn't need that moment, that I had already moved so far past it that it barely registered. Because revenge, when done right, isn't about the other person at all. It's about reclaiming your own story, piece by piece, until it's yours again. That night, as I walked out of the gala with the sound of applause still in my ears, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the one who swallowed her doubts, ignored her instincts, and kept trying to hold together a life that didn't want her in it. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly what she deserved, and exactly how to get it. And that was a life worth celebrating. If you were in my shoes, would you have walked away quietly, or waited for the perfect moment to make the truth explode? I'd love to hear how you would have handled it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story had you holding your breath, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is the one they never see coming.